Good evening, everyone. I first met Akbar Ahmed when it was in 2001, the spring of 2001. It was just after, some of you remember that in Afghanistan there were these very large Buddhist statues of the Buddha in Bamiyan, and they were seen as idols and inappropriate symbols by the Taliban, and they were destroyed at that time. And being a Buddhist, I realized everything is impermanent. I wasn't too upset by it. But it was kind of at that moment that I was able to encounter Akbar, who, in observing this, was reaching out. He was reaching out to some of his students, one of whom is here tonight, who had reached out to him, and then his responsiveness. And his first impulse was, there should be dialogue. Where there was violence, his first impulse in his reaching out was, there should be dialogue. And at that time, I had the pleasure of meeting him. We had the pleasure of having numerous conversations. You attended actually an SGI meeting and what we call a district general meeting out in the Foxhole area. And it was lovely, and the relationship began then. And I saw him as a man who was just really genuinely committed to the issue of reaching across where there is conflict and changing it to dialogue. The other day we were speaking on the phone, and he made the comment to me, he said, "Bill, the world is on fire." And in that instant, it really it crystallized for me. My image or my vision of Akbar Ahmed is one of the world's firemen, who is where he sees this conflict, happening between East and West, which has been heightening in recent years. We all know this, between the Islamic world and the Western world. That he has been the person who has just been determined and giving every ounce of his strength to substitute conflict, or even where there's conflict, but to address it through dialogue. And so he's been someone I've long admired, and I'm really delighted that we're able to bring you here to tonight's distinguished speaker series. One way I'd like to introduce him is through, while it was mentioned, a very recent book of his is Journey into America, The Challenge of Islam. Another book, which is coming out very soon, I believe, is published by Busboys and Poets, and it is called Caught in Between, or some place.
What is it called, Emily? One of my students.
Suspended somewhere in between, which is I think,
it's an old professor's trick.
Which is a book of his poems. And I think sometimes in poetry, a person's outlook can be so succinctly and passionately stated. So I'd like to maybe start off this evening by introducing this one poem in particular called What I Seek. I hope I got that title close. Emily? So, if you'll look at this one.
What is it that I seek? A force of such might, it sets me free, a light so bright, it blinds me. I heard it in the voice of the nightingale. I know it was in the hearts of the wise. I sensed it in the lover's tale. I saw it in your eyes. I heard it in Rumi's poetry. I know it was in Gandhi's gaze. I sensed it in Mandela's oratory. I saw it in Jesus' ways. What is this riddle, and what is its part? What is this enigma and mystery? What can reveal the secrets of the heart? What has the power to change me? It is God's greatest gift. It raises us high above. It is the bridge over the rift. It is love, love, love. Give it in generous measure. Give it as if there's no tomorrow. Give to all you meet this treasure. Give it and banish sorrow.
When I found this poem on YouTube, so in case you want to see it, when I found this poem on YouTube, I noticed that right up there was a poem dedicated to his mother, and that intrigued me even more. And I know that my teacher, President Ikeda, has always talked about you really know the centrality of a person's humanity by how they care for their mother or how they regard their mother. In fact, there's a Buddhist teaching that says, hell is in the heart of a man who despises his father and disregards his mother. So I wanted to share, it's a very brief poem, but I wonder if we can share that poem as well. So just, you turn off that light too. Would be a bad time to lose our internet connection. Here it is. Here we go.
To my mother, when I walk at night alone in the deep wadis of her sobs, or when I know that each time I drive past or lays the reply to her letters, when I know that at midnight she sits up praying to her God to keep me warm and whole, when I know that she will still bless me though I give her eyes cause to tears, when I know that all my warts and ways will turn to gold at her simple touch, then I see through her the God she sits rotating her beads to. And then I know that her God will always be there for me to reach out and touch.
So without any further prelude, let me introduce Professor Akbar.
Thank you so much for arranging this marvelous gathering. It's a poet's dream and delight, a captive audience. Since they have to listen to and see my poetry. Bill, I do want to thank you for your leadership, for your friendship in these very difficult times. You have given us, you have blazed a spiritual path which we all can follow and join you on. I'm really grateful for that. You mentioned the Bamiyan statues which were blown up in Afghanistan. You, as a good Buddhist, were more philosophic about it. I wasn't. I come from South Asia. The South Asian Muslim is in a unique position. You may see the chaos in Pakistan and feel that this is what it is. It wasn't always like this. The South Asian Muslim has on the one hand the legacy of the Abrahamic faiths. He shares the legacy of Judaism and Christianity. And he's in South Asia, the land that has produced the other great religions, Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism. So in a sense, a Muslim who is sensitive to humanity, to spirituality, is in fact capable of being a bridge, a true ambassador between these faiths. Let me share a personal story, and in telling this story, this wonderful American audience, I'm going to introduce you to a name, and I don't want you to forget that name. It's one of the greatest names of history, which you, alas, may not have come across. My first posting as Assistant Commissioner, I was a young man, 27 years old, and I was made in charge of a place called Mansehra in North Pakistan. It's a huge district, and it's the gateway to Kashmir from the Pakistan side. And I've just taken over, and I was fascinated to see that on the main highway, and this was the highway of ancient India, there was this huge, mysterious rocks, stupas. And of course at school I had heard about the rocks with their carvings on these rocks of the great Emperor Ashoka. That is the name I want to share with you. Now, a lot of you may not have heard the name. Some of you may have heard the name, but those who haven't, please remember this name. He is the one emperor in India, in the history of India, thousands of years of history, remarkable history, sophisticated history. The one emperor who's called the Emperor of Emperors. Over 1,000 years later, there will be another great emperor. And that emperor was Akbar the Great. Also an emperor, and also highly respected and revered. But there's only one emperor of emperors. And I was fascinated. I was a young assistant commissioner, and I went to the district gazetteers written by the British. Here's another thing we as Americans need to learn, that every culture has something to teach us. We mustn't show contempt for the world. We have something to teach the world has something to teach us. The British, who were ruling the planet in the 19th century, the sun never set on the empire, did a lot of research on Buddhism. And they translated these rocks. And I was amazed at what I read. And as a young administrator, I realized how important these lessons were of how to administer people. Ashoka is telling us that every administrator must administer justice. He must show compassion. He must always care for the less privileged, the deprived in society. He must always take some time for himself to meditate, to cleanse himself spiritually. And all these principles stood me in very good stead as a young Muslim administrator in Pakistan. Now, Ashoka, of course, is very close to our history in that part of the world. And I was even more amazed at how Ashoka came about to be Ashoka. You need to know that history also. Ashoka was like all emperor of emperors, a very successful warrior. He fought battles, he had many wives, he was a tyrant to many people. And in this great battle in Kalinga, he slaughtered 100,000 people. And that was a turning point for him. He walked about the battlefield in a daze. And his generals came up to him and said, Emperor of Emperors, you have triumphed. You now rule, you rule 1/4 of the planet. This man is ruling what today is Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, up to Burma. That's, in terms of population, 1/4 of the planet. And he said, looking at the dead, he said, if this is victory, what is defeat? He saw the dying, he saw the suffering, the wounded, and at that instant he became a Buddhist. And he followed the path of Lord Buddha. Now, what is the essence of that path? And where can we, and we're having this dialogue, the Islamic Buddhist dialogue, where do we meet? Islam on the surface, certainly here, a lot of the media in America is projected as a violent religion, and seeing the news from the Muslim world is really depressing. We've just heard today that Mr. Bhatti, the only Christian minister in the cabinet in Pakistan, has been assassinated. You've heard of these two, of this young Muslim in Frankfurt who shot some American servicemen. We are seeing Colonel Gaddafi completely unhinged, absolutely a mad tyrant. And we are wondering what is happening in the world of Islam. Not only the world itself, but the world of Islam. And here, Bill, I see the strength in our traditions and our faiths, where they do meet. Buddhism tells us about the 3 poisons. The 3 poisons being anger, greed, and ignorance. These are what consume us. However rich you are, however powerful you are, however young and beautiful you are, these 3 can absolutely corrode you. They're like cancers in you. So what is inside you becomes critical. If you are in control of these 3 poisons, if you can deal with them, you are the master of the universe. Money, fame, looks, everything goes. Everything is temporary. But these are the 3 poisons which can be overcome. And of course, the Lord Buddha has his way of dealing with what he calls dukkha. Dukh means sorrow, suffering. And in Islam we have a similar path. For me as a Muslim, we have 3 pillars of Islam which are critical. which are being challenged today. The first is ihsan, or the notion of compassion in society. This is critical, Bill. Again and again, people talk to me about Islam and they're concerned about terrorism and violence, and they say Muslims are taught to be violent. And I remind them, I remind myself again and again all day, that God in Islam has 99 names. And the two greatest of these names, the two greatest attributes, which God uses to define himself in Islam, are compassionate and merciful. Now God could have said, I have 99 names, call me the forceful, the terror, the just, or the avenger. God says, no, I am compassionate and merciful. Define me as such. So compassion is critical in Islam. And compassion in Islam, in the Quran, trumps everything. It trumps everything. So even when you've been wronged, even if when you're wanting revenge and you're angry, even then compassion trumps it. Then there's ilm. Ilm means knowledge. Now ilm in the Quran is the second most used word after the name of God. So God is telling us again and again and again that you're human. You have the capacity to think. Compassion, you feel like a human. Thinking, you begin to use your mind. The finest thing God has given you. You use your reason. You use logic. You use learning. And in the great days of Islam, Bill, you remember that in Muslim Spain and in at the height of the Mughal Empire, when Akbar the Great was Akbar the Great, scholars were writing and poets were producing their poetry, and there was a great tradition. Women were contributing. Every part of society, whether you're Muslim or non-Muslim, people were able to participate in civilization because ilm was valued. Not by every emperor, I hasten to say, but a lot of rulers valued ilm. So the scholar had his own niche. Today, I ask you, Bill, where's the scholar in the Muslim world? He's either sitting in America or Europe because he's being chased out. How did Saddam treat the scholars? How is Gaddafi treating the scholars? You know, except for that terrible green book of his, you have no other books in Libya because the scholars have all been wiped out. That's what the dictator and the ruler does when he's neurotic about power and ruling and paranoia. So this is the second thing. And the third, of course, is adl, justice. That God demands, another name of God is justice, the just in Islam. And God demands justice of the rulers, that they must in turn be just to their people. And here again, where you're seeing the news on your television sets, you're seeing what's happening in Egypt, in Tunisia, and Yemen, and Libya. Where's the justice? If you're a young Muslim, you'd be saying, I have no compassion. I have no justice. I have no access to knowledge. My life is in misery. We have no food at home. I have no jobs. My literacy rates are the worst in the world. And yet I'm told to acquire knowledge. Forget America, forget hating America or America's foreign policy. I'm just talking about ordinary life for a Muslim, where every Muslim ruler must now begin to rediscover, like you're talking about the principles of Buddhism and the great enlightened Kada, we also brought so much learning to the world in terms of the so-called Gakkai movement. We need to, in the Muslim world, once again revive these three pillars, where we can have compassion, learning, and justice. Where rulers rediscover this. And there have been remarkable rulers who have followed this path. So we face, Bill, today in the Muslim world, major challenges internally. Why is it important to you this evening? It's important because the United States of America, and I'll end on this, today has direct relationships with the Muslim world. You and the Muslim world are literally, as my friend Wahid Shah, who's sitting here, very distinguished intellectual and minister from Pakistan, said that America and the Muslim world, the phrase he used was, are handcuffed together. And you can ask him about that. I've quoted you correctly, I hope. His wife is here, so I can't misquote her. My wife is here, so I have to be doubly careful. So, that term, just visualize that term. And why are you handcuffed to the Muslim world? Right now we have hundreds of thousands of young men and women soldiers in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Pakistan, maybe in Yemen, maybe in Somalia, maybe going into Libya. Hundreds of thousands. 1/4 of this planet is Muslim. 57 nations. And of these Muslim nations, there are 5 or 6 which are absolutely pivotal for us in terms of our foreign policy. Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Morocco, Pakistan, Indonesia. We cannot have an effective foreign policy without these Muslim nations being on side. Now, do you think we can really afford to lose these? Do you think we can afford to lose, with all the tensions, all the problems and misunderstandings with Pakistan right now, and relations are really bad? You know what's going on with the Raymond Davis affair, and we can talk about that. Relations are really bad, they're at a rock bottom. Can we afford to lose Pakistan? You lose Pakistan today, and you lose Afghanistan tomorrow. Literally, it's that bad. Because Pakistan provides intelligence, on-the-ground army, land route into Afghanistan. Logistically, it's a nightmare to think of losing Pakistan. And yet we are at the brink. We are almost there where we could be losing Pakistan because of the great tensions between the two countries. And again, I look back to Pakistan and I see a nation of 180, 85 million people. It's nuclear. It's a very important nation. And see the situation in Pakistan. Pakistanis killing Pakistanis. Pakistanis attacking other Pakistanis. Minorities being attacked. I gave you the example of this Christian minister being killed. Is this what the founders of Pakistan wanted? They did. Here I see and ask myself the same question. When I look at the widespread Islamophobia, the tendency to demonize Islam, paint it with a broad brush, all Muslims are terrorists, the Muslim next door is a terrorist, and suddenly you've got 7 million Muslims who are all being pushed into a corner and being given a label or a category. Did the founding fathers of this great nation, Washington, Jefferson, Franklin, did they want this? They didn't. Let me end with this image. The image of Thomas Jefferson, and you may have seen this, the statue outside his university in Virginia. The statue where an angel holds a tablet. And this is where, Bill, I believe every American can be proud of the vision of this country, the vision of its founding fathers. And I know they had many things they could have done, the role of women, the role of the African American and so on, but they created a frame within which we could then paint, where Abraham Lincoln could then paint there, and then Martin Luther King Jr. and JFK and others could paint and enrich, and President Obama right up to our times. And that angel is holding a tablet, and the tablet says religious freedom, 1786. Think of it. We're talking the 18th century, and take a look at what's happening in the rest of the world. You have despots, you have tyrants, and you have empires, and you have decay and destruction. And here we have the vision of a new nation, a new society. And Jefferson has on this list God, Christian God, Jehovah, the Jewish term for God, Allah, the Muslim term for God, and we believe it is the same God. And then, this is where Buddhism comes in. Not content with the Abrahamic faiths, it goes on. It talks of the Hindu and Buddhist gods. And that to me was absolutely amazing. He's also talking of the non-Abrahamic deities. So America becomes genuinely a pluralist society, where every faith is welcomed and respected. And therefore, as Americans, we ask ourselves, would the founding fathers have been comfortable with some of the stuff that we are seeing about Islam? Can any other religion be so demonized, so treated with contempt, with open contempt and suspicion like Muslims? And why are we then simply kicking a community which obviously seems to be down? And we are kicking it because we can't kick it. And why are more Americans speaking up and saying, wait a minute, it's not so much about Muslims alone, it's more about America, how we are defining ourselves. And what encourages me, Bill, that in the midst of all this, you have heroic attempts by Americans to reclaim their own sense of identity. Not simply because they believe that Muslims are particularly good or decent or noble people, but because as Americans they must do this. You know, again, when I go back to the Bamyan statues, I was very upset about that. And I was equally upset when the Taliban who took over the state of Swat, where my wife comes from, the Taliban temporarily occupied Swat. Now, her grandfather was the ruler of Swat, took great pride in the Buddhist legacy of Swat. So he was, of course, a Muslim ruler and a great ruler in his own way. And as you entered Swat, you entered it, and to the right, carved in a mountain, was this spectacular statue of the Buddha, Lord Buddha. Perfect, it was a perfect statue. And it was really a marvel. Every time we passed, I would just pause and look at it and wonder. And they blew that up. Actually, they blew the whole thing yet, or is anything left or right? So, Shibil, these are our treasures that we share. And they're telling us something, reminding us something about what we need to be as human beings. And therefore, we go back to the notion of the three poisons. If somehow, as human beings, we can remove these and reach out to each other in compassion, in learning, in justice, with knowledge of each other, we touch. And it's a time when you look at the world and look at the map of the world and look at the state of the world, where I think this lesson is more important than ever before. So thank you so much, Bill, for giving me this opportunity. I'm delighted to be here.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it, and I told you this before, because I saw your analysis using the three poisons is something that came out in your book, Journey into Islam, Challenging Globalization. And I was struck by that, and I was struck that you even cited President Ikeda's, Mr. Ikeda's reference that in his work and their effect on globalization, some of the ills of globalization. What particularly intrigued me, if I could just stay on that for a minute, is that when you talk about the response, the antidote to anger you see as compassion, in common, that virtue of compassion, which is the antidote to the poison of anger, the antidote to ignorance being the learning, as you put it, ill, or learning, and then the antidote for greed you have as justice, and I think that incorporates economic justice, a sense of being economically just in one's behavior, which is not covered so much in Buddhist tradition. So I liked the way that comment kind of rounded out my own sense of my own tradition. I appreciated that. I want to throw in a comment about the three poisons, that the Buddha saw these three poisons emerging from a more fundamental cause than what he called fundamental darkness or fundamental ignorance. And as a Buddhist and one who believes in the Lotus Sutra, which posits the fact that every human being has you might call divine or the boundless Buddha nature, the wisdom, compassion, it's inherent, it's immanent within their life. That Buddha taught, and the Lotus Sutra teaches, that these three poisons come out when one has a fundamentally deluded view of their own life. When their own life, their own sense of self becomes lowered or spiritually impoverished, then these three poisons become right. I think when human beings have a great sense of their own dignity and of themselves and others, then I think that is one of the more fundamental ways we can begin to eradicate and mitigate the impact of the three poisons as well. So I appreciate that. I also want to footnote the fact that Thomas Jefferson, one of my favorite Americans, not though I realize he was a complicated person to say the least, but he also had a copy of the Quran. He had his personal copy of the Quran. There's a lot going on in the Islamic world, as you had mentioned before, and right now we see the unfolding of a lot going on in Northern Africa and the Middle East in terms of the democratic movement. There is a sense in the West, I think, that democracy is somehow exclusively an Enlightenment product. It's something that is exclusively the product of Western thinking, and it's exclusively their treasure. I believe that this is a Western-centered view, and I think it overlooks other important philosophical sources for democratic forms of government. For example, in the Lotus Sutra that I mentioned before, there are numerous examples of the equality of women, where women attain Buddhahood, a woman becomes enlightened, where between laymen and clergy there is a sense of equality. And so these are some very foundational philosophical principles that I would argue that come from a different direction, but lend themselves to a democratic approach. And so the question I have, and I'd like you to ask you to address, how are you seeing what's erupting now in the Middle East, what's all these these protests against the dictators in those countries? And can you talk a little bit about roots for democracy, philosophical roots for democracy? And of course, they're being influenced by Western ideas as well, but I'm sure there are also some roots to be nurtured that come from the Islamic tradition as well.
Bill, this is a great question because I'm asked this as I've traveled on this journey into America. I traveled across the country. We went to 75 cities. And in many gatherings like this, one of the first questions about Islam would be, is Islam compatible with democracy? The assumption was that it isn't. And Americans are absolutely right in making that assumption. Because when you take a look at this 57 group of Muslim nations, there are very, very few democracies. Of course, there are democracies like Saddam Hussein's democracy, where 99% of the people always voted for him. Libya's democracy. You always wonder what happened to that 1%. Where are they today? So that's the kind of democracy. Now, tragedy, of course, is, Bill, that we in the West, we in Washington, very often accepted those Democrats. We supported Mubarak for decades. We supported Gaddafi hot and cold. Yesterday is the favorite day before he's a nutcase. Once again, he's a nutcase. You know, that is confusing. Now, that's a separate issue. Let's go to Islam itself. So this was something that I, as a Muslim scholar, as an activist from my world, had to confront. This is a clear and unequivocal situation. Islam, in terms of religion, is perhaps the most egalitarian of any faith on this planet. Let me back this up. There is no kingship in Islam. There is no kingship. There is no priesthood in Islam. The Prophet of Islam said there is no monkery in Islam. Women have the right to inherit property. I'm talking of the 7th century. They have led armies, 7th century. They have written books, they have written poetry. They can initiate divorce. The Prophet's wife, who was older to him, was a widow. She's the one who initiated the marriage proceedings with him. Islam's formation at prayer is so democratic, or during the Hajj ritual, or the visits to Makkah, Medina, that it takes your breath away, literally. Because everyone entering that sacred site has to dress in a certain way, very simple, white cloth, and you have no idea who the guy on your right or left may be. Maybe the king of Saudi Arabia, maybe the president of some country. Everyone's equal. There are no signs of class or distinction. So Islam and the Quran again and again and again says we have addressed the women and the men, and you're equal, and you're only, and color. Another thing is color. Islam is absolutely colorblind. And the Prophet in his last great address said that there is no black, there is no white. There is no Arab, there is no non-Arab, which means color and ethnicity don't matter. It is the content of your character, the content of what is inside you that determines how good or bad you are. And yet, you're absolutely right, we have a problem with democracy today. So this is how I analyze it. First of all, of course, the Enlightenment, the Renaissance. There's a Muslim connection which we tend to forget. All that comes back from the fountainhead of Western civilization, which is the Greeks. Socrates, Aristotle, Plato. The notion of democracy, the notion of the nation state, the notion of standing up and challenging your rulers, it all goes back to the Greeks, and we are proud of that. But have we for a moment thought of where the Greeks came from to the West? That the Greeks had been lost to the West. For centuries and centuries, the Greeks were lost. And it was the Muslims, the Muslim rule in Spain, which helped translate, with the Jewish scholars and the Christian scholars, translate the great works from the Greeks for centuries, 1,000 years ago, from where they came into France and into England, from Latin into local languages, and in turn kick-started the Renaissance and the Enlightenment. So when Thomas Jefferson, who's a product of the Enlightenment, is talking about the Enlightenment and the great Greeks, he's in fact implicitly acknowledging what the Muslims had done. Now, the Muslims, on the other hand, when Europe is waking up and America is being discovered, and suddenly the world is changing, 17th, 18th, 19th century, let's take a look at the Muslim world. That is the time when the Muslim world is heading for chaos, despotism, disintegration, and crisis. And it's in a spin. It is the period of colonization. It's barely surviving. It's barely clinging on to its own identity. And then in the middle of the 20th century, you have another sort of revival in the Muslim world, where many Muslim leaders are fighting for a modern state. And here again, Bill, a lot of people don't know this. And here's another name I'd like you to remember from this evening. Ashoka is one. The second is Jinnah, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, founder of Pakistan. Mr. Jinnah creates, in 1947, the largest Muslim nation on earth. This is the biggest nation in the world, Muslim nation. And it is a democracy. His vision is of the constitution, the rule of law, women's rights, minority rights. He himself is a lawyer. That's the vision of a modern Muslim state, where he's going to balance modernity and tradition. It didn't work out. It's collapsing, there's fragmentation, there's chaos, there's anarchy, but that vision is there. Every Pakistani, and again you can confirm this with Mr. Shah, carries that vision of Mr. Jinnah in his heart, because it was there. It's the foundation. It's like every American carries the vision of the founding fathers. For us, Jinnah is Jefferson, Franklin, Washington, all rolled into one. So here we have the answer to the question, is Islam compatible with democracy? There's nothing within Islam which says you must not be democratic. Nothing at all. Nothing to justify the dictators and the strong men and the corrupt rulers. And there is evidence, even in modern times, of a practicing democracy. Again, many clauses didn't work. Perhaps in 10 years there was the first martial law, but for a moment there was a glimmer of hope. And we, Bill, as human beings, live on hope. We live on hope. And if somehow we can revive that image in the Muslim world, somehow we can show that image, I think there's a lot of hope. And what encouraged me so much, and I'll end with this, Bill, is the revolutions taking place in the Arab world. You know, we had assumed, scholars and commentators and so-called experts had given up the Arab world. In fact, a thesis was spread that Muslims like to be ruled by strong men. And I heard many people say this. I heard Vice President Cheney saying this on television just before the Iraq war. He said Muslims like strong men, they like Saddam Hussein, they like Mubarak. The fact is, no one likes a tyrant. But the Muslims becoming obvious right now. No, not only is that obvious, I want you to think for a moment, pause and think. We've seen the revolutions in China. We saw them in Russia. We saw them in Iran. We saw the French Revolution a few centuries ago. And what we saw was non-stop, unending bloodshed and violence, violence and violence. Revolution creating more revolution. What we saw in Egypt and Tunisia and Libya was a people, by and large, there were scattered incidents of violence, by and large, very calm and very brave, incredibly brave. And you saw women turning up with children, old men, young men wearing jeans, Twitter, Facebook. Where were the men with beards? We were being told by our so-called experts in America, Islamists about to take over, they're lurking behind the scene. It's a Muslim plot. It's either the strong man, who we must support, the tyrant, the brute, or the men with the beards will take over. What happened to that thesis? Now, of course, America, unlike Japan and the cultures that you are familiar with, have a tradition of honor, so that if someone feels that he has dishonored himself by saying something so incorrect, they go home, they write a beautiful poem, certainly better than my poetry, and they commit suicide. That is a tradition of Arakiri, because you say I've dishonored something. The notion of honor is so great. Now, fortunately, we don't have that tradition here with our experts. So we continue to hear the experts making the same mistake again and again and again and again.
And we missed their beautiful poems.
Thank God for that. I think the poetry will be as bad as the prognosis of things. So we got them wrong on Iraq, we got them wrong on Afghanistan, we got them wrong on Egypt, we're getting them wrong on Libya, and yet they're speaking in the media confusing us. And look for yourself. Don't go to the experts. They've got it wrong. Watch what's happening. Trust your own eyes. Trust your heart. Ordinary people, mothers, fathers, old men talking of the torture they've experienced, the rape the women have been subjected to, the terror of the people, and yet they're revolting on their own. They have no one to support them. It's ordinary people like you and me standing up to this brutal machine and taking it on with sublime courage. I remember someone in the square, the Tahrir Square in Cairo, saying on television, at the height of the crisis, not sure whether Mubarak's going to leave or not, talk of torture, talk of people disappearing, and this young man looked in the camera and he said, so his face is there, he can be traced, he can be picked up later by the Secret Service, and he says, I don't care anymore. Let them kill me. I've reached that point of desperation. When that happens, then he's crossed into a state that I believe is what we are talking about, where he's challenged all the poisons and removed them. He's taken on the greed, the ignorance, the hatred, the anger of the rulers and said, I am going to challenge this. I'm not taking this suffering anymore.
Now, what I'd like to do, there's not enough time in the day, there's not enough time in this evening, but what I'd like to do is maybe with everyone's understanding, I'd like to see if we could kind of extend our evening just a little bit, maybe about 15 minutes to 8:45, because I want to open the conversation a little wider now and invite some of the folks here. If you have a question or a comment you'd like to make,